Hey everyone, Savi here, and today I'm back with another video, and this time I'm going to explain something about coloring and shading in digital art. So I have prepared these two line arts, which I'm going to color with different coloring techniques. And on the left side I'm going to color with the technique most beginner artists use. So when we compare the two in the end, you will see the difference between the left and the right side. So often beginner digital artists take color too literally, and they just take their base color and add a more black into it to make a shading color. This seems very logical, but it doesn't really look fantastic or interesting. When I'm going to color the right side, I'm going to show you why. And another thing beginner digital artists are using very often is the airbrush tool, which is understandable because it is really easy to use and it has a decent effect and the edge is soft, so it kind of looks okay, but you can't really paint with it and it doesn't have enough variety and interesting textures. And that is what I see a lot with beginner digital artists, using the airbrush and staying very safe in the color wheel, while the color wheel is very important to use. And for example, this skirt, I want to make it look black, so it seems logic that I use a black color and add some black shading over it. But the thing is, when you use black or white, you can't go any darker with the black and you can't go any lighter with the white. So I always advise not using black and white in a very early stadium because you don't really need those colors. So let's go to the right side, and this is my go-to coloring style with just the brush and really painting on the different things, and also keeping in mind where the light's gonna hit and where not, and where the shading's gonna be and where it's gonna be a little bit darker, etc. So I'm paying way more attention to the shading, and I think also beginner artists, when they use the airbrush, it easily looks like it's already done. I mean, you've done over it with color, so it should be alright. But for example, with coloring these eyes, I'm switching around green, a darker green and blue for the shading. So it's really important to really switch over different hues and saturations while coloring. Example, for the orange hair, I pick a light orange, but I go on the color wheel to a more reddish color for the shading, and this gives it a way more interesting texture. And the same for the highlights. I'm not using a lighter orange because that won't be the lighter color, but it will be yellow, because when light hits orange hair, for example, it won't light up lighter orange, but it will be more yellow. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And now I will just continue coloring the skin, and I'm really paying attention to really paint the shading. So I'm not using the airbrush to only shade, but I'm also pressing the Alt button so I can pick up the colors which are appearing while I'm painting, because I really want to blend those colors in, and I'm using more different skin tone colors, and I'm using other colors from the color wheel. And for the shoes, I want them to be black, but as you can see, I'm not using grays and blacks to paint these shoes because that seems really unrealistic and creates a very flat image. So in the end, I just play around with light. And for this green sweater, which is really interesting to see, I started out with a very nice green, but I'm coloring in it with a darker blue. And as you can see, that looks really pleasing to the eye. And that's mainly a big difference with beginner digital artists coloring and shading, that it doesn't really look pleasing to the eye. And when you use different hues and saturations of the color wheel, you will create a way more interesting picture. As for the skirt, I'm using a more bluish and grayish color than actual black and gray or white. This way I can even give my drawing more contrast because I haven't used black yet, so it can get too dark and I can still go over it with a darker color. And I'm just adding some final coloring lighting touches on it, and as you can see, I'm also giving the line art a coloring because that will look also way more interesting, because I don't like how the line art looks so 100% black, especially not with skin tone. So I always prefer to take another darker skin tone color and color the line art. So as you can see, when we compare the two, you can really see that they're so super different. And let's be honest, the right one looks way more interesting and natural than the left one, and that's mainly because of color use, because the line art is the same. And especially on the skirt and the shirt, you really can see the difference, because on the left one I really only used the same green of that color wheel, so I just picked a green color and picked a darker green and then an even more darker green to create the shading on the shirt. While on the left side I picked a nice middle tone green and went to the blue side of the color wheel for the shading and a little bit more to the yellow side for the highlights. So I think that is really important to keep in mind, and it's okay to experiment with the color wheel. So just don't use the flat colors like black and white, because you can't go any darker when you use black, and when you use white you can't go any lighter. So it's best to avoid using those colors until the very end stage of your drawing, because you can add sparkles or a little touch of black somewhere, that's okay, but don't use black mainly as shading. And yeah. Well, I really hope you found this really interesting to know, and I just want to give a little disclaimer because I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing my knowledge with you guys, and I really hope that that's appreciated. And I also really hope you liked this video and found it interesting, and I hope you learned something. So see you all next week, everyone. Bye bye!